Greetings and salutations, my excellent friends. Welcome once more to the QiRanger Podcast. I am your host, Steve Miller, the internet's QiRanger, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the podcast via QiRanger.com, iTunes, or for the second week in a row, you can actually listen to it on my QiRanger YouTube channel. And if you are watching or listening to the podcast from YouTube, please note that this is just still, but there's a couple of cool features of the image on the screen if you're at a computer. Everything on the screen is annotated, so you can go to the podcast, you can go to the show notes, you can subscribe, you can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Everything on the screen is annotated, so play around with it. I think you'll enjoy it. So, yes, this is episode number 11 of the QiRanger Podcast 2013 edition, and it's also the last one of the spring season. School has now ended, and I am in vacation mode, wrapping a few things up here in Dongtan, and then heading off to the Philippines for a week vacation, coming back about the middle of July, which is when I will be picking up the podcast once more and doing full-on versions yet again with lots of news, lots of travel. And I'm actually thinking about bringing back the full video podcast as well. I have a new idea of how I want to shoot that, so we'll take a look about how to enact that once we get back here in July. But first up, you can also go over to QiRanger.com, follow the links to the show notes, and you can get links to the big videos last week. And again, really have to say thank you so much to Canon Korea for agreeing to be the camera sponsor for my upcoming video series, Steve Miller's Explore Your Environment, or simply titled Steve Miller's Eye. The C100 is a magnificent camera. We have actually gone out and filmed a few snippets of footage for the upcoming Eye season. Right now there is going to be anywhere between 10 and 12 episodes for that, and I'm really jazzed about using this camera. It is a blast to use. One of the things I am going to be doing with the C100 is doing some behind the scenes how to film with it, or how I am filming with the camera, which may be of interest to those who have questions about the C100 and how it differentiates itself between some of the other Canon DSLRs. So get ready to take a look at that, but follow the links. Content Rewind has all the big links over to QiRanger.com and associated videos for that. So here we go. Let's go off with this week's only big news story that I'm going to have time to cover, and that is from South Korea and goes back to something which I think is very important, and that is free speech. Now, here in Korea, free speech is greatly limited, and the reason for that plays into the defamation laws here. Now, in Korea, broadcasters have legitimate libel liability. Have coverage. They have liability coverage, meaning that if they say something that is factually true, if they say something they believe to be factually true within reason, then they are indemnified from any kind of recourse because they're sharing the news. However, individuals don't necessarily have that same protection. If they say something, even though it's factually true, or if it's their opinion about something that impacts someone in a negative way, that person could in fact sue them. Now, this story comes from a rather wealthy family here in Korea. The daughter of a Korean Airlines chairman, Cho Young-ho, has filed defamation suits against 3 internet users for their online comments critical of her recent childbirth in the United States. Now, the woman went to the United States to oversee a project and had her child there, thus what the critics are saying basically is she went to the United States to have an anchor baby. That child is now a citizen of the United States because that child was born within the confines of the borders of the United States. And that is a practice used by many around the world who are from developing nations. They feel that if they can just set foot in the United States, have a child, and have that child automatically become a U.S. citizen, then that by default puts them with one leg up over their counterparts in their home nation. And there are a lot of arguments on whether or not that is really true, whether or not this is a practice employed by many around the world. And I don't want to really get into that because one of the biggest challenges in the United States is with immigration. There's a lot of bills going through the United States with the immigration reform right now. And this is one of the aspects that really needs to be decided because in my home state of Arizona, you have a large number of individuals coming across the southern border who then have childs, who then legitimately have rights in the United States to attend public school and to get benefits, whereas the parents are illegal aliens. So that is a whole nother ball of wax. But in this particular issue, these internet individuals simply shared their opinion, were critical of Ms. Cho for having the child in the United States, and whether or not Cho's really intended to do this shouldn't even be called into question. And the reason why I say that is because what's at heart of the matter here is simply expressing their idea that was critical of her was enough to have the charges brought up against them. And the Foundation for Press Freedom has often said that is really what limits individuals here in South Korea is the ability to really express their idea, to have their opinion heard in a general sense, in a general forum, is really limited because as soon as someone says something negative as an individual, then those companies can come after you and claim defamation, even if the information is factually true. So there was a case a while back where several internet bloggers were very critical of Samsung technology. So Samsung, rather than going after the bloggers, actually went off after the blogger platform host, which I believe was Naver, and actually had Naver pull down those articles. Again, stifling free speech. And that is really what needs to change here. If you're going to have a democratic society, you need to be able to freely express your ideas. And I don't mean express them in a way that is defamatory, that does cause slander. But if you have a legitimate opinion, a legitimate critique of someone's behavior, then you should be able to express that idea without recourse. So you can, of course, have the link to this article from Yonhap News over on the show notes on QiRanger.com. But that's all the news I'm going to cover this week. It's time to move on. But for additional news in the region, both breaking news and other important timely issues, please subscribe to my YouTube channels and make sure you follow QiRanger.com for other stories that come up. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter because I'm always sharing information there. If you have anything that comes across your mind that you would like to ask me about what's going on in the region or about life here in South Korea, you can, of course, send me a message. To do so, just type an email to questions@QiRanger.com. But now let's head for Take Me Away. This is my weekday travel segment that can be heard initially on 101.3 TBS EFM in Seoul. And this week we are talking about going to Paju. Hey there! Hope you had a fantastic weekend. And unfortunately, it is Monday, which means we have to get back to the grind and start working again. But it's never too soon to start thinking about where to go off on your next adventure. And this week, we're going to be talking about Paju. And this is a site, a location in Korea that not many people head off to because it's not really high on the destination list. But it is fairly interesting, and I thought I'd talk about it this week. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, where have I heard this name before? Well, it's gotten in the news recently because of its proximity to North Korea, and it's the gateway to the Kaesong Industrial Complex, where a lot of work was done by South Korean companies up until recently. But it's also very highly designed and designated as a great tourist destination because there's a lot to see and do in there. But since it is very close to the DMZ, that's what I'd like to talk about today, because when a lot of people come to Korea, that's probably one of the most interesting experiences you can have. Now, there are a lot of different tour companies that offer different excursions into the DMZ, all along the DMZ. But in Paju, there are a lot of different things you can actually see. And one of the more interesting aspects of the DMZ are what are called the infiltration tunnels. Now, these are tunnels that were dug underground from North Korea way back in the day, after the end of the Korean War, in an attempt to one day possibly infiltrate South Korea. Now, there are a couple of different infiltration tunnels that have been opened up to the public, and one of them, probably the most frequented, is the third infiltration tunnel. And you can actually go into this tunnel when you sign up on a couple of different tour operators. And this is a very interesting experience because it's really far down underground, and they don't let you take any pictures or video down there because of safety concerns. But when you go to the park, they have a lot of information about how the tunnel was discovered. Essentially, there was a defector that came across from North Korea, and he notified the South Korean government that, hey, North Korea is digging tunnels underground into South Korea, close to Seoul. And the way that they found this was the defector had an idea of the general location. So then South Korean military officials dug holes into the grounds, trying to find out where these tunnels were, and ultimately they found several of them. Now, the third infiltration tunnel is probably the most developed for tourists, and you actually ride a monorail down underground, about 30 or so meters. And you actually have to wear hard hats because the rock is very jagged. And myself, being 6'4", 194 centimeters, there were times when just in the monorail itself, the little tram going underground, I actually hit myself on the head a few times. My head was brushing up against the ceiling of the cavern. And then once you're down below, you can feel the dampness of the subterranean cavern, and you're actually able to walk through the tunnel to a certain point. And again, because I'm so tall, I actually had to hunch over about halfway and just hunker down to make my way through there. Now, they said that about 30,000 troops could pass through this area per hour, and you really get a sense of what it would be like to be down there. It's very, very interesting, and especially if you're interested in Korean history and the Korean War, this is one place to go. Now, if you've ever wanted to go to the DMZ, you do need to adhere to a few different guidelines, and all the tour operators will let you know about that, but it is a very interesting place to go. It's almost surreal. I've been there 2 times, and the first time I was there, I was actually able to see the North Korean guards standing along the military demarcation line. And I was never really afraid, but you could feel the tension in the air. And I think it's probably one of the best travel experiences you can have in Korea. So if you haven't booked a tour to the DMZ, I really highly recommend it. Well, that's all the time I have today. I'll be back tomorrow with more about Paju. Hey everyone, hope you're starting off your Tuesday with a delicious, delicious cup of coffee. That's the way I do it every single day. Now this week we are talking about heading up to Paju, a little town in the Gyeonggi province, and it actually wasn't formed into a proper city until about 1997. But there are a lot of things in the city that I think are quite interesting, and one of them is the Paju Book City. Now, I find this interesting because even though I don't read paper books all that often, I should say, I do find the history of books being printed and bound interesting, and I love going to bookstores. In fact, my wife and I really relish visiting some of the bookstores around Seoul and perusing the different titles because we like to see what is being printed, what information we can find. And then typically I will buy an electronic version of it so I can take it easily on the road with me. Now, the Paju Book City is actually the National Cultural Industrial Complex for printing history for publishers here in Korea because they wanted a place to preserve and showcase how books are put together, especially here in the 21st century. And this has been going on since 1989. And in addition to just the showcasing of all these technologies, all these processes on how to make books, they actually have a lot of bookstores in the area so you can go there and look for different titles and look for different things. And it's a lot of fun because you get an opportunity to see some things that you may not see in some of the larger retailers around the country. But that is only one thing to do while you're in Paju. The other thing is, of course, one of my favorite my favorite options when I go sightseeing here in Korea, and that is to visit UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And in Paju, they actually have 3 different royal tombs of the Joseon Dynasty, and they're called Gyeongnung, Seongnung, and Yeongnung. And each of these tombs is exquisite. But if you've been to some of the tombs around Seoul or in the Gyeonggi area, you may notice a few differences with the tombs in Paju. See, here in Seoul, a lot of the tombs that are being constructed have a granite relief around the base of the mound where the king or the queen are buried. And on these reliefs, you typically have pictures of lotuses and pictures of zodiac warriors from around that tomb. And here in Paju, you have the mound, but you don't actually have the granite relief around the base. And that makes it a little bit more interesting to watch. Now that you still have the pine trees and the tombs are still built on mountains, and you have the sheep and the tigers warding off the evil spirits, and all the other aspects of the tomb are there, but the actual construction of the tomb is just a little bit different. It makes it a little bit more interesting because when you visit the 40 or so tombs here in South Korea, each one has its own unique feel, its own unique characteristic, and that's why it's so intriguing to go see them. So if you're in the area and you're looking for a little history and culture, go check out the tombs. They're easy to find and they shed a light into Korea's past. Well, that's all the time I have today. I'll be back tomorrow with a little bit more to do in the area. Good morning. As you sit back, hopefully with that delicious cup of coffee or tea, I got to tell you, I have a great hike for you today. Now, as you know, I am an avid outdoors person, and with the temperatures becoming on the warmer side, I love getting out there. Now, if you're in the Paju area and looking for something fun to do outside, they have something I think that is very interesting, and that's the Yongmiri Sokbulapsang, and that translates to a stone standing Buddha. Now, this Buddha is placed on the left top side of Yeongnam Temple, located in Jeongji. Now, that is one of the mountains in the Paju area, and this standing stone Buddha is produced by, bringing 2 different large rocks together. Now, the big boulders are on the adjacent side close to the temple, and they're stuck together like the bodies. They form really the bodies. And then the upper portion of the boulders are actually carved to look like the faces of Buddha. And these date back all the way to the Goryeo Dynasty, and they are amazing. If you've ever seen some of the stone carvings of Buddhas anywhere around Korea, you know how spectacular they are. The bodies themselves are just ginormous slabs and boulders of granite. And then as you go up higher onto these boulders, that's where the carvings take place. And I'm always amazed at the intricate details that are associated with these stone carving Buddhas. And as I said, these date back to the Goryeo Dynasty. And what makes them a little bit more interesting is that they take on several folk characteristics to the people that have lived in the area for a number of years. Now, according to oral traditions, Wonribul is a statue of a man, and Bangribul is a statue of a woman. Now, in the Koro dynasty, King Seonjong didn't have a child, so he married Wanshin Gungju. But she was unable to give him a boy. She wasn't able to give him a male child. So she became worried, and one day she dreamed of two Buddhist priests and they said to her in this dream, "We are living in a crevice of the rock in the mountain at the southern foot of Changji Mountain, and we are hungry. Please give us food." And then all of a sudden in her dream, they disappeared. She woke from her dream and told the king, and the king sent a man to the mountain to look in that particular spot. And that man reported two huge rocks standing in a row below Changji Mountain. The king commanded the people to carve the two Buddhist priests at that particular spot, and they also built a temple there to offer their prayers. And since that day, that has been the spot where people have prayed, and Prince Han Sanhu was born shortly thereafter. Now, such the myth has also been satirized and many different beliefs here in Korea, but that is one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard, and I've never really had that experience myself when you've had a dream so vivid of a place you've never been to before that you go there. But in this particular case, the queen, or the princess rather, who became the queen later on, had the dream, and you're able to find the actual boulders, and that's how the Buddhist statues were built in that day. So I think it's pretty cool. If you want to go hiking in there and take some pictures, please let us see them. I think that you'll find them as spectacular as I have found them in the past. So that's all the time I have today. I'll be back tomorrow with more. Thursday, almost time for the weekend. I can't wait. Now, this week we are talking about Paju and things to go see and things to go do while you're up in this Gyeonggi province town. Now, one of the things that Paju is very famous for is its soybean. And coming up in November, they have the Paju Jangdan Soybean Festival. So if you're looking for something to plan later on in the fall, early winter, please mark this down on your calendar for something fun to do. And I think it might actually be kind of fun to head up there and experience the festival along with some fun wintertime. Fun wintertime activities, should there be an early snow. Sometimes in the mountains and in some of the areas outside of Seoul in November, you can actually get a little snow. So maybe there will be some in this November as well. Now, the theme of this festival is soybeans, and it's a health food that has long been popular in Korea. And in particular, the Jangdan soybeans produced in the Paju area have always been highly regarded for their taste and outstanding nutritional value. And they were even served to the kings back in the day. Now, in the early 20th century, the Jangdan soybeans were designated as the most superior soybeans in Korea and were even distributed all over the peninsula. Now, during the festival, visitors can taste the soybeans and learn how to make different kinds of dishes with soybeans, including tok or rice cakes, tofu, and how to preserve soybeans. Now, I love making tok. I love making rice cakes, especially the traditional gooey kind where you have to take the glutinous rice and you take the hammers and you just smash the living daylights out of it. It's just a lot of fun. And it's very easy to get there. You can even take a train or a subway all the way up there. It's very easy to get to. So if you're worried about having to drive or worried about having to get up there in November and it being too cold, don't worry. Transportation is a breeze. Now, if you're like me and you also like to indulge your better half in shopping excursions, Paju actually has another set of premium outlets. Now, like the outlets we've talked about in Yeoju, this is an outdoor market that was conceived of and managed by both a Korean company and a U.S. company who is experienced in these outdoor markets. And this one has a lot of different shops. They have actually 165 different shopping places that have a wide variety of goods. And because it's an outlet shopping center, some of the goods are 25 to 65% off, and in many times are cheaper than what you can find at various duty-free places in Seoul or even at the airport. So it's a great place to look for souvenirs if you want to purchase something up there. Now, they also have a lot of restaurants and a lot of cafes. So if you're like me and don't necessarily like to do a lot of window shopping, you can bring your better half there, let them do the shopping, and then you can sit in the outdoor environment, sit in a cafe, and just take in the beautiful air, the beautiful scenery, and just relax. It's a lot of fun. So if you're looking for fun things to do, that is two of them. The festival in November and, of course, a little shopping excursion. So that's all I have today. I'll be back tomorrow with one more day, a couple more ideas about what to do in Paju. I love the way Friday just rolls off the tongue and gets you excited about the weekend ahead. So this week we've been talking about Paju, and there's a lot to see and do in there. It's hard to fit it all into just 5 days of discussion here on TBS EFM. But I have two more recommendations for you. And one of them is, of course, an outdoor activity as we approach the summer months. And that's an excursion to the PLZ. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, what is the PLZ? Is it the DMZ? Well, yes and no. Along the Imjin River, which is really close to the DMZ, there is a peace and love zone. And that's the PLZ. It's a beautification project that extends really far along the Imjin River. And Paju actually is located around the 6th section of the PLZ. And this is a beautiful, beautiful area that has a lot of parks, a lot of bike paths, and a lot to see and do. And one of the things that you can do is actually take a look at some of the old ports that were used along the Imjin River back in the day. And there are a lot of North Korean villages that are visible on the far side of the river should visibility be good that day. But one of the things that you can do is schedule a little ferry ride in the river and go down a short section of it to get out on the river and just have a lovely river cruise. There's a lot of beautiful scenery around it. You can even rent some bikes and do some biking along the shores. It's a lot of fun. So check that out if you want a really leisurely type activity while you're up in Paju. Now, there is one more thing, and I think this is something that I know a lot of ladies will enjoy, but myself, I actually do enjoy a good spa day. That may surprise people, but I really do enjoy a spa day. And located near the Paju Book City is Beauty Town. And this is it's a big complex that is dedicated to all things beauty. And it has some, displays, I want to call them, on how Korea's makeup industry and cosmetic industry has been developed. But what's really cool about the environment there is that you go to Beauty City and you sign up for a package. And with that package comes with whatever you want to sign up for. There's lots of different options for you depending on a short package of, say, 40 minutes long or a long one that's 2 hours plus. And what you can do is receive the treatment and then look your best, look refreshed. But inside this facility, they have a trick art museum. Now, if you don't know what trick art is, these are various different kinds of pictures that you can take photos with that look surprisingly realistic, but also comical. For example, if you have a picture of someone pouring a glass of water or a glass of milk and the cup is overflowing, that liquid would then spill out of the frame and you can try to catch it with your hands, and the picture resulting in that is quite funny. One of the museums I've been into in the past was actually really funny because you could have the famous Scream photo with the individual with his hands next to his face like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone, and the reason for that is below the picture frame someone is pulling down his pants. So these are the types of pictures and experiences you can have there, but the spa day really is magical. So if you're looking for another type of fun indoor activity, especially in the winter months, this might be something for you. Well, that's all the time I have for this week and all the time we have for Paju. I'll be back next week with another location. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that will just about do it for this week's podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. And again, remember, I'll be taking a short break while I'm on vacation. I will be back with the podcast and with more videos at the middle of July. Now, while we are in the Philippines for vacation and while I'm just kind of lounging around here, I will be posting to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And now that Instagram actually has the video feature, look for some fun things on that as well. Now, if you enjoyed the podcast, please, I hope you will subscribe to the podcast. You can also do that by popping over to iTunes to rate it and comment it. It's one of the ways that the podcast can grow and get featured. If you know of someone who's interested in South Korea or travel or just news in the region, I would appreciate it if you would share the podcast with your friends if you would think that they would find it helpful. Now, if you have any feedback about the podcast, please be sure to drop me a line. You can do so at podcast@QiRanger.com. But until next time, remember to be true to yourself and always be awesome. The QiRanger Podcast is written and produced by Steve Miller and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license. Take Me Away's theme song, Morning Blue, was written and performed by Josh Woodward.